everybody. Now it's official. We'll start the live presentation right now. I hope everybody can see my screen correctly, can hear me correctly. It's just 5 past 7 a.m. for me, so I hope my morning face is not scaring anyone. Feel free to use the chat function, leave questions, talk to each other, share where you're from, what languages you work with. This is supposed to be a nice brainstorming and networking event. And yes, my birthday is next week, exactly a week from today, the 14th. And because of the pandemic, my plans were scrapped and I can't go to Brazil to celebrate with family and friends. But I thought, well, let's just do something special and just have this event here. I'll have another one in a couple of hours in Portuguese and just spend time with colleagues and share some ideas. We'll be adding more people to the live event as they come in. So feel free to leave your questions and I'll go through all the questions in the end. All right. So we are officially starting right now, and I'll give you a brief introduction just so you know what to expect from this session, and we'll discuss 3 different ways on how we can diversify as translators. All right. So 3 approaches: the language combinations that you can use, and the services that you can diversify your services and your fields of expertise. Okay, so these are the 3 approaches that you can use to diversify yourself. A little bit about me. I see a lot of familiar names there, but if you don't know me, my name is Rafa Lombardino, and I've been a professional translator since 1997. I can't believe it's been 23 years, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'm certified by the American Translators Association in both English to Portuguese and Portuguese to English. And I also have a professional certificate from the University of California, San Diego Extension in Spanish into English. And I specialize in technology, in IT, because in a past life I got an associate's degree in computer sciences with emphasis on data processing. So that's one of my first specializations as a translator. And then I'm also working a lot with communications, especially business communications, because in another past life I got my bachelor's degree in journalism, in social communications. So I work a lot with businesses, newsletters, brochures, articles, anything dealing with journalism. I also specialize in education. I'll talk a little bit about it later, but it's a specialization that found me. So a lot of educational records, school transcripts, certificates, especially for the immigrant community here in the United States. And also EHS, which is environment, health, and safety, another specialization that found me because one of my clients needed a lot of training translated in that area for employees in Brazil. And then the last 2 specializations that I have that actually brought me to this whole world of translation is audiovisual, because I was always interested in subtitling movies and series. That's how I grew up consuming content in English through subtitles. So for the past 10 years or so, I've been able to add a lot of audiovisual materials to my work. And literature, also being a fan of books, I wanted to work with literature, and also for the past 10 years I've been working a lot of fiction and nonfiction. So these are the areas that I work with. And just one more piece of information here about what I do, so you know where I'm coming from with all this information. I'm the president and CEO at Word Awareness, which is a small network of professional translators working together since 2004, and we incorporated in 2009 here in California. And I'm also the blog editor at the PLD, the ATA Portuguese Language Division. And I served as the administrator in 2007 through 2019. So it's always great to talk to Portuguese translators, Brazilian Portuguese, African translators through the PLD at the ATA annual events. That's something that I really enjoy, just meeting new people that work in the same language combinations that I have. I'm also an online instructor at pros.com, and you can find a lot of webinars that have been recorded there. I forgot how many sessions we've had online with them. And I teach at the University of California, San Diego Extension. So after I graduated from their program, they brought me in to teach tools and technology and translation, which is a 10-week online class. And it's more of the practical side um, of translating day in and day out, not just about language or specializations, but actually how to incorporate technology into your daily work so you can be more productive, more effective, more consistent. So that was a class that I developed for them 10 years ago already. I can't believe it. And it's been great to interact with almost 400 students in these 10 years. And it became a book, as you can see over there. It's available paperback and ebook. And the thing I'm doing this week is I have a discount on the ebook if you go to Amazon.com. Only the US store. I'm sorry, they don't let me put the discount rate for other stores for some reason. But if you go to Amazon.com, if you have an account at the US store, you can get the ebook today through next week through my actual birthday for $5.99. All right. And the last thing about my resume here is that I host the Translation Confessional podcast. So if you haven't heard about it, you can find it on different podcast streaming apps. And I hope you like it. It's more of the confessional side, as the name says. I talk more about my experiences as a translator. All right. So enough about me. That was all you needed to know about my background before we start talking about what really matters today, which is diversifying yourself. So the first approach I wanted to talk about today is language combinations. All right. So as translators, languages come easily to us. So have you ever considered acquiring more knowledge in another language to add to your language pairs? So it's something that takes time, of course. It's something that you have to approach with caution, but it helped me a lot. I started in '97 just doing English to Portuguese. Then when I moved here to California, clients started asking me for Portuguese to English. So I studied a lot. I worked with proofreaders and copy editors. I got my certification, passing the ATA exam for Portuguese to English. So I've been improving myself to also offer that service for the past now almost 20 years. Then later on, I added Spanish as a source language, and most recently, 10 years ago, I added Italian as well. So it's something that is a slow process, but it really pays off because right now I can be busy more than I would have been otherwise if I only had one language combination. So it really helps when you study hard and add more languages to your source language list. All right. So talking about that, let's see here. We know that acquiring knowledge in a new language is pretty tough and it takes time, like I said. It's not something you can do overnight, but that's something you can include as a long-term goal. All right, so if there is a language that you like, that you've already had contact with, or a language that is a high demand in your country, I highly recommend that you start studying it now and refining your skills and your understanding in that other source language to add to your current language pair. All right, but it takes time. And two heads are better than one because one way to improve your translation skills is to work with a colleague who translates from your native language into your additional language so you can review their work and learn. And what I mean by that is that back when I moved here and clients were sending me documents to translate from English to Portuguese, they would say, "Oh, can you translate it for Portugal too, besides Brazil?" And I'm like, I can't because it is different. So what I did was I hired someone from Portugal to work with me, and we've been working together since 2004. So depending on what the client needs, the target audience that the client wants to get, either I translate it for Brazil or she translates it for Portugal. And that way I was able to understand Portuguese from Portugal better because they are a little different. And I can translate from Portugal into English. So it just working with her has opened my eyes to the different localization within the Portuguese world. And the same thing happened when clients would ask me for translations into Spanish. I do not translate into Spanish. I am not nearly as fluent as I would like to be. I couldn't do this presentation in Spanish, unfortunately, but I translate from Spanish. And partnering with a colleague who does English into Spanish and Portuguese into Spanish, I've learned so much more, and I believe that I became a better translator just by reading her work. Every time I would translate something from English to Portuguese, and she would translate the same thing from English into Spanish. I learned so much from just reading her translation that it helps me when I work with Spanish as a source language. All right, so two heads are better than one. Look for colleagues who can help you with that, and you can learn from their work. All right. And limitations, that's one thing that I always tell my students too. Be honest with yourself. And if you are adding another language to your combinations, start working with the best case scenario. So start working from that additional language into your native language in your main field of specialization, because that way you acquire more vocabulary and you avoid frustration. Otherwise, it would just take you too long. You won't feel as productive. So be honest with yourself on what you can do. Okay, so there are some subjects that can translate a lot better between Portuguese and English than, let's say, from Spanish and Italian into Portuguese or English. All right. So best case scenario, you're able to still stay productive and keep the same average output if you translate from your additional language into your native language and your main specialization. So, for example, my best case scenario working with Italian, which is my fourth language, was translating a whole book about marketing for freelancers and entrepreneurs. I mean, that's my niche right there. I wrote a book in English about that, targeted for translators, but that was the best case scenario. I translated a book from Italian into English about something that I know a lot about. I stayed productive. I finished the book before the deadline. But if I was going to translate something that I'm not familiar with from my fourth language, that would take too long. There will be more room for mistakes and more frustration. So be honest with yourself and remember that there are limitations. Just do things that will help you stay productive. All right? So that was it for the language combination approach. And I'll move on to the next approach, which is specialization. All right? I talked a little bit about it, just giving you some examples for the first part of the presentation, but now I'll just go a little bit more into it. And you can expand your fields of expertise by exploring additional subjects of interest. You can draw from your personal experiences and hobbies, or you can make a conscious decision to specialize in a field that is in high demand for a language combination. Okay, so I always have to stay alert and see what clients need translated in your country, in your target language. All right, and these are the approaches that you can take to getting more a wider specialization, a wider list of areas that you can translate about. So you can draw from your experiences because that's the best way that you can be more productive and just translate about things that you already know, right? And where do your experiences come from? From your education and from your employment, from your academic experiences and from your professional experiences. So as far as education, have you ever attended a trade school or a college program before you became a translator? right? A lot of translators go to language schools, language courses. They graduate as with a language major. But if you attended a trade school, like it was my case with computer sciences, or going to college for another subject, like I did with journalism, these are things that I can draw from to get my specialization, right? So, what subjects have you focused on or that you were interested in, you liked the most as a student? These are things that you can add to your specializations as a translator because odds are you have a lot of knowledge on those subjects compared to other things you're not familiar with, right? And besides that, before you became a translator, did you work professionally at another in another field? Did you have another career before you became a translator? Or were you a volunteer or an intern at a professional capacity? And what were those areas related to? And what happens with some of my students is, especially when we get to the 1 week when they're supposed to write their resume or a cover letter, they always feel frustrated and scared sometimes because they they say, I have no experience as a translator. How can I create my resume or cover letter if I have nothing to show? And I always ask them these questions about their employment situation now or before they started studying towards having a translation degree. And they say, oh, I'm just a secretary. And yes, I already do some translation at my job, but I don't have translation experience. And then I start asking more questions. Okay, so the company where you work at as a secretary, what is their main service? What is their product? What are they selling? What are they providing to their clients? And then once they start telling me about that, we drill down into their specialization. Well, you already know what you know about this segment, this business. So try to specialize in that. Another example was someone that works at a school district, either as a translator or as an assistant. Well, you already have education as your main field because you know all there is to know once you're in there working at a school. You don't have to have translation experience as a translator for so many years to be familiar with a segment, with an industry, with a field. So your employment experiences, even though you are not officially working as a translator, that can be also your specialization. So think about that, your volunteering activities, your work as an intern, and draw from that to add more fields to your areas of specialization. All right? These are some ideas on experiences. And now interests. If you haven't had any professional hands-on experiences in a given field, if you have a particular interest in a given subject, odds are you're very familiar with specialized vocabulary in the target language. All right. So your interests could be your hobbies. It could be from your family. It could be sports. And I'll share you now some ideas on what worked for me when it came to adding different subjects to the work that I do. As far as hobbies, your activities, non professional, non academic activities, are just as important. So tap into that for your specialized knowledge and just draw from the activities that you enjoy doing in your daily life, right? If you collect something, if you travel a lot, you most likely have had a lot of experiences on this end, on the tourist side, to know a lot about tourism, about hospitality, about traveling. So all those hobbies come into play when you're working as a translator and trying to break into a different field. Um, it's not a field that I work with on a regular basis, and it's also not a hobby. But for example, I translated a lot of materials about baby bottles and other accessories right after I became a mother. So I had a 4-year-old daughter, first time mom. Of course, I researched a lot when it was for me to buy stuff that would help me take care of my daughter. And when I saw that a client needed someone to translate their materials into Brazilian Portuguese, I came with that personal experience, once again, not a hobby, but I shared the information that I was a new first time mom, that I had a new baby at home, and that all that information that I had acquired as a first time mom would help me get their products translated correctly. So, once again, not a hobby, but it's something that helped me from my personal experience to land that project, and the client trusted me to work on their materials. Okay, so some ideas on different activities you can add to your specialization. And when I talk about family, of course, you can't learn by osmosis by just sitting next to someone who is a lawyer or a doctor or something. You won't have all the knowledge that the person has because the person is your mom, your dad, and works in the field. That's not it. But if you take interest in their activities, if you just pay attention to what they talk about and when they're sharing information about their careers, there's a big chance that you already have a lot of specialized terminology in the fields that they are familiar with, right? And on top of that, you would have a consultant right there next to you. So if you have a project in that area, you can ask questions to someone that speaks that target language and that can help clarify some ideas about that field, right? So, for example, EHS, Environment, Health, and Safety, is a field that found me because a client had a lot of needs for training in Brazilian Portuguese. So they had great materials in English, and they needed that in Portuguese to communicate with their Brazilian employees, right? To make sure that they're not hurting the environment, make sure that they're working safely, and that they are keeping their health in check. So what happened there is that I started working with EHS because of that client, and as I'm translating a lot of stuff, I kept remembering things that happened in my childhood with my dad. My dad is retired now, but he used to work at a big chemical company. And one of the things that he did was inspect exactly that, the health and safety of employees there. Make sure there were no leaks, make sure everybody was working safely, not hurting the environment. It was 70s and 80s when a lot of people were talking about ecology and were more aware of not hurting the environment. Having factories and plants in different places. So all that information was already in my head from just, hearing my dad talk about it. And he didn't talk that much. He's a very quiet guy. But I had memories of what he shared from his work when I was translating all those training guides for Brazilian employees for my client's company. All right. So you won't learn by osmosis, but there are some things that will come to you and they'll be able to ask someone that you trust and tap into that demographic and that target audience, right? Because if my dad was still working at that place, he would be consuming very similar material translated into Portuguese, right? So that's how your family, your friends can help you understand more about a different subject, right? And sports. If you practice a physical activity or you're a fan of a given sport, you don't need to be an Olympic medalist, but you can master terminology in your favorite sport just by watching it or by practicing and reading about it. For example, here at home, we all run a lot. My kids are very active. My husband has always been a great athlete, so I try to run and follow them. And I read a lot about running. I go to a lot of Facebook groups about running. So that's terminology that comes to me very easily, right? My husband is also a surfer, so yeah, typical California, stereotype. He's a California surfer, so we have a lot of magazines and documentaries about surfing. So these are things that also come to me kind of easily. So, what's the activity that you like? You like dancing, yoga, Pilates, whatever you do, you most likely already have a lot of terminology in that field that you can start working as a translator, talking about it, right? I've had, for example, I'm a horrible soccer player. I cannot. I have no skills. I can't play soccer, but I've been passionate about soccer for the past 30 years now, and I've been watching and I know everything that is going on in the soccer world, and that helped me when I worked for the FIFA website during the 2006 Germany World Cup, right? So all the knowledge that I had as a fan came into play to translate their website and translate a lot of articles about the Germany World Cup in 2006. So that can also help you land some projects because you're already used to consuming terminology and materials about that subject, right? And the other thing you can add more fields to your specializations is based on demand. Sometimes your field of expertise finds you, like I said, in the case of EHS or in the case of education. There's a high demand for Brazilians coming to the United States to continue their academic career or to get their professional credentials validated after they went to school in Brazil and they want to work here as, I don't know, a nurse or a physical therapist or an accountant. So there's a high demand for that kind of service, translating a lot of academic and professional records. So that's a specialization that found me because that's what clients needed from Portuguese to English, right? So think about things that you're interested in that also has a high demand for your language, for your country, and go after that. Go try to acquire that new field of expertise. All right. And how can you do? You can get specialized help, especially if you're working with an end client, with not through an agency, because agencies are kind of the middle person there. But if you're working with a direct client, you'll most likely have access to their engineers, to their attorneys who created the regulations for the policies for that business. So once you're working with a direct client, you can have that knowledge come to you when you have direct contact with the people that create the materials that you're about to translate, right? So that's one of the perks of working with a client that has a demand for your service, a direct client in that case. And you can also go to trade associations, to events that are hosted by, let's say, oil and gas trade events. You want to work with oil and gas, or you want to work with medicine, with medical subjects. So you can just go to events that are hosted by associations in those fields, and you can learn more, right, about their field or their trends or their advancements. But you can also probably be the only translator that is there. And if you contact some people during that event and you keep tabs with them, you will be their go to language source, right? As translators, sometimes we forget about the world outside and we just worry about the translation world. And we go to a lot of events and webinars and sessions like these, and we learn more about being a translator or being an interpreter. We're always improving ourselves in that area, but sometimes we forget that there are events out there where our clients are at, right? So if you go to a medical convention, there will be a lot of doctors or a lot of researchers there, and most likely you'll be the only translator around. And not only will be learning, getting knowledge from that event, you also be networking, just sharing some business cards, and you can land some great clients because you just showed up and you were there, right? So think about it, and you can just look for what's in high demand, go to professional events like that, and start networking with end clients. And that was it for fields of expertise. And now we'll go into services with more hands-on ideas on the kind of services that you can branch out into to be constantly busy, to keep a constant workflow, right? As I mentioned before, I started translating more after I added more language combinations to my list. I started translating more after I diversified and branched out from just IT and communications, because those were my educational fields before I became a translator. But I also can stay busy because I offer different services, right? If you're the absolute expert in just, let's say, English to Portuguese language translations, great. You can still have high demand. But if you branch out to other fields or other services, odds are you be able to stay busy longer, right? So let's brainstorm some ideas on other services you can add to your portfolio. Interpreting. That's the go to for translators, right? That's the natural progression. They can become interpreters. Well, it doesn't work for everybody, and I can tell you honestly that I could never be an interpreter. My brain is not wired that way, unfortunately. I know so many gifted interpreters, and most of them are also translators, and I'm just in awe watching them. They're just amazing. But my brain doesn't communicate with my mouth when it comes to interpreting. I just can't. But I'm good with like just my brain and my fingers, and I can type fast and I can do research. So I cannot do interpreting on the spot, right? I know that I cannot do it, but that's something that you could maybe have a knack for. So if you are looking into being an interpreter, you can be a simultaneous or consecutive interpreter. You can do the whisper interpreting. It's something that we see a lot with politicians, right? When there are two presidents or heads of state, and there's someone there just whispering behind them, doing the interpreting on site, right? So that's another type of interpreting that you can do. And there's also sight translation. It's not talked about as often, but I see more and more people are using it now. I actually had to do sight translation exercises when I was going to UCSD extension, and I would always be sweating and shaking because it's just not my thing. I'm not in my element. But sight translation is when you just get a document in one language, right? And you're interpreting that not from listening to someone talking in another language, but by reading something in another language. So if you have, I don't know, you're in a business meeting, you're an interpreter, and they have a document in Spanish, and you have to read that, but start saying it in English, what's written in there. That's what sight translation is. It's a kind of interpreting, even though it's called sight translation, right? It's from sight, from seeing something written and interpreting it on the spot, right? And you can specialize in community, dealing with schools and dealing with immigrants. You can also work with business interpreting, helping clients with meetings or with visits to a plant or a factory. You can do medical interpreting at hospitals during surgery. I have a friend who's an amazing interpreter, and she has interpreted during surgery and during delivery. Babies are being delivered, so it's just amazing what interpreters can do. A court interpreter working with legal matters, with someone in front of the judge and with the lawyers, right? You can also interpret at conferences. That's when you are inside the booth with a partner and switching back and forth during an event when there's someone on the stage, someone with the microphone up there. And you can also do government, not only the whisper behind the president or head of state, but also in governmental settings, in agencies or departments that need an interpreter on the spot to help people that come to them and speak another language, right? So interpreting demands intensive training, a lot of practice, and perhaps certification in some locations. So for you to work at the courts, you may have to take the test and become a state certified court interpreter or medical interpreter. So just research that and start now if you want to start interpreting maybe in 5 years, right? Because it requires a lot of practice, and people who can do it, they are amazing. I know that I cannot. Another idea is editing. And this is a tricky one because there are different types of editing, and people mean different things by requesting an editing project. All right. Always make sure you talk to your client to know exactly what they need, because editing is just an umbrella term. A lot of people may have different expectations from an editing project than what you're familiar with, right? So editing could involve copy editing, which is when someone translated something and someone will come in and review that and make sure that there are no grammar mistakes, there are no spelling errors, right? And it can involve maybe a bilingual review, that person copy editing your translation also knows the original language, or sometimes the person just does not know the original language and will only work based on the translation. All right, so that's what copy editing is about. Proofreading is more about the visual. So, for example, I do a lot of proofreading because my clients send us the documents, we get it translated. I translate it into Portuguese, my friend translates into Spanish, someone else into French or Italian. So we have all those copies ready for the client. And once they put into the layout and create a PDF, we get to proofread the final version to make sure that everything fit correctly, that there's no cut off text at the bottom of the page, that the syllables are separated correctly, right? Because of a lot of desktop publishing programs, they do a syllable separation based on English separation, and it's completely different for other languages. So we have to just reread everything to make sure that that final proof, that final copy of the material is ready to go with no mistakes. All right. Sometimes clients can request editing services when they actually want the language assessment. What I mean by that is that they want to see if that content is correct, or they're trying to bring someone on board and they need you to vet if that person is doing it correctly in that language. For example, I've done voiceover language assessment reviews. So the client said, oh, can you just review this for me? And they wanted to know if that was real Brazilian Portuguese or Portuguese from Portugal. Sometimes the audio clip they would send me was in Spanish, not in Portuguese. So you do that language assessment. In that case was with an audio file, but you can also do it with written documents. It can also be for entrance exams when students are trying to immigrant students are trying to apply for a college program or something, so you can do a language assessment to see if that person can take classes in that program in that language. All right, so they sometimes call it editing or review. Can you edit this or review this? But it's actually language assessment, right? Another subject that kind of goes into editing is critical reading. And that's when you are hired to read, let's say, the first copy of a book. The book hasn't been released yet, but you'll be reading it and almost like fact checking, not just for the language content, but for the facts in it. I had some examples where there was a book where the character's name kept changing. So sometimes it was, the name, sometimes it was the nickname, but it wasn't a consistent way. It wasn't like, oh, family and friends are calling this character, by the nickname, and other people are calling by the full name. No, there was an instance where, it changed from, like, I don't know, Peter to John, or John to Joseph. So sometimes an author is just going through the process and those things just fall through the cracks. And when you do the critical reading, you're actually giving feedback on the contents of a book, in most cases, and letting the author know, hey, you need to clarify this, or you need to make changes to make sure the character name is consistent throughout. So that's how you're not just editing for language purposes, but you're just giving feedback on the content, right? That's what it's called critical reading, right? And something that goes with it is book scouting. There's some publishers that they send people that speak more than one language, which most of the times, we could be also translators. They send translators or language connoisseurs to book fairs so they can see, for example, this book in English that is doing very well, and can they bring this to the Brazilian market. So you'll be scouting for books that publishers can acquire rights for translation so they can bring those books into a different language, right? It's something fun. I have a couple of friends that do that, and they've brought great books into the Brazilian market in that case because they worked as book scouts. Okay. And the last one I wanted to talk about is the post-editing machine translation kind of editing. And I don't work with it myself very often. I've done very few times. I want to say I'm pretty picky about it because I take one look at it, and if I say, hey, that's just going to take way too long, if I were translating it from scratch, it would take me like an hour. If I have to make sure that everything looks okay through post editing, it would take me 2 hours. So I'll turn it down. So I know that I'm very picky with it, but I know great translators who have been staying very busy because of post editing machine translation. That's something that matches their style. They're still very productive when they're post editing. Their clients have good machine translations that they work with. So that's something that really has kept them busy. And you can look into that. Okay, so some clients, let's say IBM and Microsoft, they have their own machine translation and already all the terminology and all the style that they want, but they still need someone to go in there and edit everything to make sure that there's a human touch, that nothing falls through the cracks, and that the final translation is correct. All right. I had my most recent experience with PMT, which is a job that I turned down, was subtitling. I believe the video was in Portuguese, and they said, we're trying machine translation. We generated subtitles in English. Can you proofread it for us? And I'm like, let me check. And once I opened it, let's just say I have no idea what machine translation platform they were using, but you know how Portuguese and other languages have a lot of accented characters? Yeah, all the words that had accented letters were kind of ignored by the machine translation. The machine said, I don't know what this is, I'm just going to leave it as is. So the subtitles were not in English. It was just this hybrid monster that I'm not going to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Just no. If you want me to translate it from scratch, I can do it. No problem. It's going to take this long and it's this much. But for me to post edit this thing for, I don't know, half my translation rate, it's just not worth it. I'm passing. Just look for someone else. Okay. So be careful. It's very lucrative if you get the right clients and if you stay very productive, but it can also be a nightmare. All right. But it's a very good option for you if you have the profile. And like I said, I have friends that I highly admire as translators, and they're doing great because their clients have good post editing machine translation projects. All right. Another idea, transcriptions. And that's something that some clients also get it wrong sometimes. They say, can you do this transcription for me? So make sure you ask first. Because transcription, in the strict sense of the word, means transcribing something. It doesn't involve translation, right? So you would be working with audio files, sometimes video, depending on what the client sends you, and you would transcribe something monolingual. So if I get an audio file in English and the client asks me for a transcription, I'll just transcribe in English whatever it is that is on the audio file, right? but ask, because sometimes they say transcription when they really need audio to text translation. Okay? Excuse me. I had clients that had the video or the audio in English and they asked for a transcription when they actually wanted me to listen to it in English and type in Portuguese. Okay, so that's what I call an audio to text translation. It's not a transcription, and it changes as far as pricing, and it changes as far as production, right? You can type fast what you're listening to just fine, but it takes a little longer for you to pause and type in another language and do things like that when it's an audio to text translation. Um, and these transcription projects, whether they involve translation or not, they can be paragraph style. So they can be something that you just listen to the audio or the video and you type in a Word document, just as you would paragraphs. Or it could be something more detailed that clients would need timestamps every time there's a speaker change, if there's an interview, for example. Or they need you to tag with the timestamps every 30 to 45 seconds, so someone can also find that portion of the audio or the video when they go to that timestamp. Okay, so make sure that you have it clear if the client needs a monolingual transcription or if they need an audio to text translation, and what kind of output they expect, just paragraph style, a text in Word, or if they need something that would need the timestamps. All right, so that's something that I've been doing a lot. And one trick, if you're an interpreter, is that you can also listen to the audio in one language and dictate in the other language. Okay, like I said, I'm not an interpreter. I cannot do it. My brain would just fry. But if you're an interpreter, you can do that. So you're listening to it in English, for example, and you're dictating in Portuguese. That works too. All right. And once you're dictating that, you have a document that you can just edit and make sure that everything is okay in there. All right. So some ideas about transcription. And subtitling, that's my favorite. That's what I've been doing a lot. That was my dream as a little girl when I started learning English, and I could see that I understood what they were saying and how it went with the subtitles that I could read. Sometimes I would even cover the subtitles with a sheet of paper to just listen to the original audio. But subtitling is something that I always loved, consuming subtitles. And now for the past 10 years, I've been working on a very regular basis as a subtitler. And it's a highly specialized field. It requires not only translation, but you have to master the power of concision. You have to say so many things in, a short amount of time in a small space. So there are character limitations that you have to take into account. Frame counting when the scene changes. So it's showing this person, now it's showing that person. The subtitles can't cross that border, or there are rules for when it can cross that scene change. So you have to count the frames and make sure that your subtitle ends so many frames before that switch. There's also reading speed. If it's a program for adults, you can have more characters per second. If it's subtitles for little kids, you have to have it a shorter window because kids will read a lot slower. So there's so many technical aspects that go into it, but it's very fun if you're able to learn all that and start working as a subtitler. And besides the glamorous entertainment area, right, everybody wants to subtitle movies and series and work with Netflix and Hulu and Amazon. Well, besides that, which is certainly fun, there's also other types of subtitling that you can do, and it's for interviews. It's for corporate videos, for training programs, news programming, commercials, institutional videos. Like my very first subtitling project was, I don't know, 15 years ago. It was a university video. They were introducing their university to foreign students, so they needed the subtitles in Portuguese for the video in English to welcome Brazilians into their campus as students. So that's how I started back then. Nothing glamorous. It wasn't a Netflix show or something, but that was what helped me lay the foundation to be where I am today, that I can do technical subtitling and some of the glamorous entertainment subtitles as well. All right, so that's some ideas on subtitling. And other ideas dealing with language, right? You can be a language instructor, and believe me, they pay good bucks for you to be a language instructor at a company, for example, with private classes or small classes, if business executives need to learn another language because of their work. All right. You can be a cultural consultant, not only to help businesses bring products to the target audience. For example, I think we all know about the one car Nova. It had a nice name like Supernova. It's futuristic, but then in Spanish it was a fiasco because it means nova, meaning it doesn't go, it doesn't work. So who, among Spanish speakers wants to buy a car that says, the name of the car is it doesn't work, it doesn't go. So there are a lot of examples of products that don't translate well as far as their name. And as a cultural consultant that knows the language, the target country, you can say, hey, you may need to change the name of your product. Or maybe sometimes it deals with cultural sensitivities. I work with a lot of clients that put together training for employees, like I said, and sometimes it's training for how to end sexual harassment at work, how to end prejudices in case of racism at work. So all that kind of training not only needs translation, but sometimes a cultural consultant that will help people adapt that content that, for example, is in English into another language. Right? That's what we do. We live in two or more cultures, so we can help our clients be more conversant in different languages, not at the language level only, but at the cultural level too. And something else that I do a lot is voice talent, and there's also dubbing. I'm not into dubbing at all. I cannot act my way out of a paper bag. I cannot pretend I'm an actress. It doesn't work for me. But because of my training in journalism, and I did internship for 6 months at a radio station, I can just put my journalist hat again, put that on and just have a more tone, a more appropriate tone to my voice, and I can be infomercial and journalistic and present the news or narrate a training program in a way that people will find my voice pleasant. So I can just talk like that. Once I put my hat back on, I'm not always this fast and all over the place like during this informal presentation. But as a voice talent, I can give my voice to a client's product, video training, or something else like that. And if you do have extra skills and you're a good actor, you can try dubbing as well. It requires a lot of practice, of course, but it's something you can think about as a language person. All right. You can also work as a DTP editor, and that means desktop publishing. And it's another thing that I got from my background in journalism, because we not only learn how to write articles when you're going to journalism school, but they also teach you how to plan a page, like for a newspaper, for a magazine, right? So that's something that I can do too. I've been kind of slacking on that because the program that I used to use back in 1999 when I went to college, it doesn't exist anymore. So I never really learned more about other products. I never learned about InDesign, for example, to offer DTP services at that level. But I can do a lot of brochures or some other simple things on other programs that I use, right? So that's something that if you like design, if you like page design, color, the use of different colors, color schemes, you can be a DTP editor as well. And when you're bilingual, you're just very valuable because some of those clients will need you when they have their materials translated. They'll need someone that will plan the page accordingly to accommodate the translation, right? You can also be a bilingual tour guide, especially if you live in a place that is tourism oriented. I have a friend who's a translator, and she has been doing some tour guides here in San Diego because everybody wants to come to San Diego. It's a nice, sunny place. So sometimes she fills up her schedule with a tour guide, bilingual tour guide gigs as well. So that's something you can consider. You can be a freelance writer. Back in the day when I was going to journalism school, at least in Brazil, you needed to have a degree in journalism to be a journalist. It's not like that anymore. I was one of the last generations that actually needed a diploma to be a journalist. But you can be a freelance writer and write articles that not necessarily are going to be a translation from a news piece from one language to another, but someone can hire you to say, I don't know, can you write 500 words or can you write 5,000 words about a given subject? So you can get a lot of information from different sources. You can interview some people and you can write an article and even use sources in different languages depending on the languages you work with, and be a freelance writer like that. There's a lot of demand for that as well. And you can be an interview or survey taker, meaning you can interview people in another language to help your customers with their surveys, with their research. It's something that is happening right now here in the United States because the census, the 2020 census, is going on right now. So I see a lot of signs around the neighborhood. If you speak another language and you would like to be a census interviewer, you can apply here, and it's so much that they pay you per hour. You have to knock on some doors. They're taking a lot of precautions right now because of COVID-19, but it's something that they can also do and help the community, especially in places like Massachusetts, New York, Florida. They have a lot of Brazilians. I'm sure that they're looking for people who speak Portuguese that can go and interview people for the census. So if you live in the United States and speak another language and live in a community that has a lot of speakers of your language, that's something you can do as well to fill up your time. All right. So my ideas, I ran out of ideas here. If you have any more ideas on services, let me know. And the only thing that I wanted to do right now, because we just hit 8 o'clock here for me, 1 hour of presentation, right on time. My conclusion after all this is, considering your current skills and your working languages and your interests, what can you do now so you can have a plan for the next 5 or 10 years and be sustainable as a translator, to diversify yourself at language, service, or areas of interest levels, and you can diversify yourself and stay busy. So think about it now with all this information that I just threw at you. Think about what you can do and start planning right now so you can start working with these different aspects of your career to be sustainable and to keep translating or to keep offering other services related to languages. And that way you stay busy, right? And that's what pays the bills. Okay. And just one final note before we go into questions. I mentioned that I have presented a lot of webinars through pros.com. So if you're interested in any of the subjects that I talked about, I do have a presentation on .sub and one on YouTube if you want to start learning about subtitling. Okay. I also have a 6-week class, Introduction to Subtitling, through UCSD Extension. So if you're interested in that, check it out, and it can help you start breaking into that field. If you like the idea of transcribing audio or translating, doing the audio to text translation, you can check out Express Scribe. That's a free audio transcription software that I use when I have transcription assignments, and I have a pros.com presentation on Express Scribe for that. I also have one on Audacity. That's the program that I use to record myself. That's the program that I use to do my narrations, right? So Audacity is also a free program that you can record and edit yourself and export the audio in different formats and do the different parameters that your clients want. If you want to go into that, if you have a pleasant voice, and can start practicing to offer voiceover services. All right. I also have pros.com presentation on Swordfish. That's the CAT tool that I use. I started using it back in 2008. Never looked back. I had used other options before, but the cool thing about Swordfish is that it is a cross-platform CAT tool. And what I mean by that is that it works for Windows, it works for Mac, and it works for Linux. I use Linux. We use Linux in our offices. So it's great that I have that option because I don't have to worry about running different programs just to make a CAT tool work. And I paid for the license back in 2008. I never had to pay anything again. Every time there's an update or an upgrade, it's for free. So if it's something that you want to do to start using CAT tools on a regular basis, that's an option that you can try. And it's compatible with everything else. I mean, I have clients that only work with MemQ or MemoQ, or they work with SDL Tradas or WordFast. They send me the projects, I translate and send it back to them. It's pretty compatible with everything. And what else? I also have something about Facebook, how I can use Facebook pages and groups to expand a network as a translator. I have a couple about literature, especially working with self-published authors. And I have another one for tools for productivity, so you can just streamline your translation process and stay productive. So you can check out here at bit.ly pros-trainer and see if anything there interests you as far as trying to learn more about the areas I talked about. All right. And that's it. I am done with all this talking. Now I want to hear from you. Thank you so much for showing up, especially if it's early for you or if it's too late, late in the evening or at night. Thank you so much for being here for this live session. And now I want to hear from you, your questions. Here are all my contacts. Feel free to reach out later on. If you had to leave early, you can actually rewatch the YouTube version later on because I'm recording all this, so you can have access to it on YouTube, and send me your questions, and we can just keep talking about the subject. All right. So right now I'm just gonna open the chat box here. I'll go from bottom to top and try to find questions that you left for me. So bear with me while I'm trying to find questions. I see a lot of happy birthdays, and it's your birthday but our present. Yeah, so that's the one thing that I wanted to do, just celebrate it differently. And if I can avoid any headache for anyone or give you any ideas, I get the gift as well, I get the present as well, so I'm happy. So what else here? Let me see. An eye-opening presentation, thank you very much. Happy birthday for next week. Yes, countdown, it's the final countdown, baby. What else? Okay, where can I find materials about your presentation? Yeah, I try to make an attachment here with all the links. It doesn't look like it's showing correctly, but I can definitely send it to you by email. When the YouTube video is ready, I'll send out a newsletter saying, hey, here's the link for you to rewatch the presentation, and I'll attach that too. All right. If you have a copy of the old communications that I sent out announcing this live event today, if you go to the bottom of that newsletter, you see all the links as well of how you can find me and get more information. All right. So another question here, is Swordfish compatible with Across? I never worked with Across. I don't know what file format they use. What is the file extension for Across? But I know that Swordfish is, they use the open source system. They don't own their format. Like you have WordFast has TXML, and SDL Tradas has SDLXLIF or whatever format it is. So Swordfish is not something that is just sat in there proprietary. So it's compatible with a lot of different formats. If you can't open a document like I can, for example, a MemoQ file, if you can open that bilingual file to start working on it, you can certainly export your translation memory and it will be compatible because it's an open source format. Okay, so I'm not sure what Across uses, but I'm pretty sure that you can work something out if you have a client or a colleague that works with Across. Let me see what else. Thank you so much for all the comments here. Okay, so another question. Besides freelance writing or content writing, many translators like copywriting. Yes, I have a colleague who's a very good Spanish and French to English translator, and she also works as a copywriter for businesses and for medical clients. So she writes copy for them. If you go to their website, that's what she wrote in English from not translating something from Spanish or French, but because she has access to the end client and interviews them and knows what they need. So she writes the copy that they use originally in their material. Right. Okay, Julian is saying that he adds a new language every 5 years. That's great. Yeah, I think I am just maxed out. I work with four languages. Two of them are passive because I don't translate into Spanish or or into Italian. But I think I'm maxed out. It's like I like French, and I could pick up some other languages, but I think my brain is pretty much fried by now. A very pleasant voice. Well, thank you very much. I think I speak too fast. I know that, but when I put my journalist hat again, I can speak more calmly and breathe correctly. Okay. Are there any sources where one could find going rates? I also heard about transcription assignments. Yes, Joanna, about going rates, it's all over the place. If you're working with an agency, they're gonna say that's how much we're paying you, take it or leave it. But if you're working with direct clients, you can negotiate your own rates. Check out on pros because they usually do surveys and ask translators about their rates, and they have kind of an international average for each language and each service. So check out pros.com because they have some good reports on that. I think every year they come up with a new report. All right. But unfortunately, there's not a place that you can say you can go and say, okay, you have to charge this much per minute for transcription. It's it just depends on the client, right? If it's an agency, they'll say we'll pay you this much. If it's a direct client, they just want you to get the job done, and you can say, well, it's going to take me 1 hour, I'll charge you this much, or it's going to take me a week, I'll charge you this much. So you can negotiate better. Okay, what else? Yes, events in your areas of specialization. Yes, go check out some events. If you're a medical translator, go to medical conferences. Well, once the pandemic is over, right? Just do it safely. But make sure you're networking with the right people because it can get a lot of direct clients like that. What else? Let me see here. If I used Prezi to create this presentation, yes, that's something I love. I can't deal with PowerPoint anymore. I translate a lot of PowerPoint slides, but I can organize myself so much better through Prezi, and I can just it goes with my train of thought. So I love Prezi. Let me see here. A lot of people introducing themselves in the chat. It's the first time I see someone celebrating her birthday with a seminar. Yeah, I know. It's just I was going to be in Brazil in 2 days, but that's not going to happen. So I just wanted to do something fun. Let me see here. Any more questions? Let me go back to the bottom of the list here. Let me see here. Feliz cumpleaños. Gracias. What else? Let me see here. How can you get certified online? Well, it depends on what you're trying to get certified for. The ATA has the exams that I took, and I'm a proctor for them. They don't do it online. It's still you have to show up at a place. So this year it was canceled, unfortunately. But you can do it on your computer. Back in my day, it was written, so I had to just write all my translations by hand, but now you can use your laptop, which is good. There are different kinds of certification. You can get certified as an interpreter, so you have to just check the regulations where you work and depending on the field that you're working with. There are some programs like UCSD Extension. They have a program for English and Spanish, both for translation and for interpreting. My classes are language neutral because it's about subtitling, about swordfish, or tools and technology and translation. So they're more general. They don't focus on language as much, even though we have some translation exercises. But that's a kind of professional certificate that you can get as a translator too, right? I see here, Cecilia, is your birthday today? Oh my gosh, and you're celebrating with me here with this presentation? Thank you so much. I'm so happy for you. Oh, that is so great. Happy birthday. I have a friend whose birthday is today also, and it's like it was completely unplanned. I was just trying to fit into my schedule because I know that I will not be online on the 14th. Let me see here. Oh, the Abraches accreditation exam will be online next year. Oh, that's great. So that's the kind of the counterpart of what I have. I have the ATA certification after passing the written exams, and Abraches, the Brazilian Association, is going to have an exam next year online. That's awesome. Great. Another question about here. About agencies asking for the rates. Oh, by all means, if an agency is asking for your rates, um, set your rates at your comfort level. For example, I have different rates depending on where my client is located because I take into account that there's an exchange rate, right? I unfortunately can't charge so many dollars to a Brazilian client right now because the currency rate, the exchange rate is pretty bad. Last time I checked, I think it was you can buy $1 with 6 reais. So my rates would be really astronomical if I was charging the same thing I charge my clients here. But I have a comfort level, so that's how low I can go. Less than that, it doesn't pay for my time, it doesn't pay the bills. So I just, I pass on some projects. But some agencies are pretty open to negotiating with you. So that's great. Good. And what else? Subtitling rates are worse than translation rates. Yes, it's also a take it or leave it thing. Back in the day when Netflix was trying to manage their own translation pool, it was better because it was a direct thing, right? You were working with Netflix directly, so it was easier to just have that one set rate per minute when you're subtitling their content. Now that they don't do that anymore and they hire agencies, the middleman takes a cut, right? So the rates just went even lower. I just try to see if it's, like I said, how low can I go to be comfortable. And yeah, subtitling doesn't pay a lot, but you just think about, okay, if you wouldn't have any projects for this week and you would make this much subtitling a series, does it compensate? Does it, keep you busy and you still have some money coming in? Great. And the next time when my direct client needs a training program or an interview translated or subtitle, I can charge my full rate and it kind of balances it out, right? So yeah, subtitling, you cannot get rich doing subtitles, unfortunately, unless you're the only person in the world that translates a certain combination. But it's something that you have to deal with and just plan ahead depending on your production, right? So what else? Any more questions? We're just past 17 minutes after 8. So some of you have been here with me for an hour and a half, 1 hour since the presentation started, and about 15 minutes of questions. If you have any questions right now, feel free to ask. If not, you can always contact me here through all these contacts, outlets, email, and my website, my YouTube channel, listen to my podcast. You can leave a message there to share your experiences. Find me on Facebook, on Twitter. I'm also on Instagram. I'm all over the place. So if you have a question, I'm very approachable. Come to me, ask me any questions you may have about this subject, and I'll do my best to help you. All right? So if there are no more questions, I will end this presentation here, and later on I'll do the Brazilian version. Okay, so thank you so much for being here, and keep in touch, and I hope that you can diversify with these ideas, and soon start working on different fields with different languages or offering different services. All right, thank you so much. See you soon. Bye bye.